A 19-year-old kid, 5 feet 5 inches, 112 pounds, once held off an entire company of German soldiers alone, then walked onto a Hollywood set looking so harmless that security guards refused to believe he was the same man. That's not the strangest story on this list. Not even close. One of these actors had a lung removed and was back doing stunts months later. Another survived a helicopter crash at 72 and relearned how to speak after a stroke. One took a machine gun round through his back, severed a nerve, and hid the limp on camera for decades. These weren't performances. These were men who had already lived through hell before a single camera ever rolled, and Hollywood simply pointed a lens at what was already real. By the end of this video, you'll never watch their movies the same way again. Let's count down the 10 toughest actors who ever walked onto a film set. Number 1, Audie Murphy, the killer who looked like a kid. We're starting at the top of the list, because once you hear this story, everything after it will feel like it's building towards something bigger, so buckle in. Audie Murphy is, on paper, the most decorated combat soldier in American history. Not the most decorated actor. The most decorated soldier, period. At 19 years old, he climbed onto a burning tank destroyer, alone, and held off an entire company of advancing German infantry for over an hour. When he ran out of ammunition, he didn't retreat, he led a counterattack that pushed the enemy back. That single act of defiance earned him the Medal of Honor. It wasn't a one-time miracle either. By his 21st birthday, Murphy had collected every American Valor decoration that existed, 28 in total. Military historians believe he personally killed or wounded well over 240 enemy soldiers, a number that rivals entire combat units, not individual men. Here's what makes it unsettling. Murphy stood 5'5" and weighed barely over 100 pounds when he enlisted. He looked like a high schooler who'd wandered onto the wrong battlefield. When a magazine cover brought him to Hollywood's attention, studio security genuinely doubted this soft-faced young man could be the legend they'd read about. That contrast, baby-face exterior, battlefield-hardened interior, became his signature. When he eventually played himself in a film based on his own war record, producers actually toned down his real achievements. Audiences, they worried, simply wouldn't believe the truth. And that's the theme running through this entire list. Reality was often too extreme for the screen. Up next, an actor whose toughness came not from war, but from a childhood that started in the middle of a revolution. Number 2, Anthony Quinn, forged before he could walk. Most actors have to imagine hardship to perform it. Anthony Quinn didn't have to imagine anything. His earliest memories were gunfire and fleeing soldiers during the Mexican Revolution. By the time his family escaped to the slums of East Los Angeles, survival wasn't a metaphor, it was daily reality. Age 9 found him already working as a butcher's assistant and laborer. When money ran short, which was often, Quinn turned to professional boxing, real punches, real rings, real risk, with no stuntman standing in for the pain. That signature broken nose everyone remembers from his films? He earned it the hard way, years before anyone handed him a script. His physical power never faded with fame. On the set of Zorba the Greek, Quinn hauled massive logs across a beach, logs that normally required 2 grown men, simply because the work needed doing and he didn't see the point in waiting. During the Guns of Navarone, he performed his own cliff-climbing stunts at age 46, brushing off every insurance concern with a wave of his hand. But what truly separated Quinn from other so-called tough guys was his refusal to hide behind machismo. He could weep openly on camera, show real vulnerability, and somehow that made him seem even more dangerous, because you sensed the strength was still there underneath, coiled and ready. Next up is an actor who combined street fighting instincts with something no one expected, the precision of a trained dancer. Number 3, James Cagney, the dancer who could drop you. Manhattan's Lower East Side didn't produce soft men, and James Cagney learned that lesson before he was old enough to shave. He didn't box for sport or trophies. He boxed because the alternative was getting beaten by bigger kids on his own block. Those brutal daily lessons wired something into his reflexes that no acting coach could ever replicate. Watch his films closely and you'll notice his punches never look like typical theatrical swings. They're short, sharp, and precisely placed, exactly how someone who has actually been in real fights throws a punch. Director Raoul Walsh once said flatly that Cagney understood punching better than any actor he'd ever worked with, simply because he'd thrown so many real ones. What made him truly dangerous, though, wasn't just the street fighting, it was the unlikely combination of that aggression with formal dance training. A fighter's instinct fused with a dancer's timing and control made his on-screen violence look almost choreographed, and off-screen it made him genuinely unpredictable in the best way. Bob Hope once joked that Cagney was the type of guy who'd knock you down, then immediately help you back up and buy you a drink. Standing just 5'5", Cagney proved that real toughness has nothing to do with height or volume, it's about certainty in every movement. Coming up next, an actor who broke ribs on set and simply wrapped them up and kept working, because stopping was never an option. Number 4. John Wayne, the man who refused to stop. John Wayne's image was built on invincibility, but the real story behind that image is even more staggering. Long before the cowboy hat, Wayne worked his way through college on raw physical strength, earning a football scholarship through grit rather than privilege. His early years in the film industry were spent hauling props and building sets, hard labor nobody else wanted. That backbreaking work built a pain tolerance that would later become legendary. While filming The Alamo, he cracked several ribs during a horse stunt. His solution wasn't to halt production, he wrapped his torso, took some painkillers, and kept shooting. The real test came in 1964, when doctors removed one of his lungs along with 4 ribs after a cancer diagnosis. For most actors, that would be a career-ending event. For Wayne, it was a pause. Months later, he was back performing stunts as if nothing had happened. The darkest chapter, though, came from a film shot downwind of a Utah nuclear test site. Of the 220 people on that production, nearly half eventually developed cancer, Wayne included. He never slowed his pace and never let it show publicly. When a director once offered him a stunt double after his surgery, Wayne simply refused. Even Kirk Douglas, who disagreed with Wayne on almost every political issue imaginable, admitted he'd never questioned the man's physical toughness. Speaking of Kirk Douglas, his own story of survival gets even more extreme decades later. Number 5. Kirk Douglas, unbreakable across 8 decades. Kirk Douglas grew up in a household where food wasn't guaranteed, the son of destitute immigrant parents who worked odd jobs just to keep the lights on. But that poverty didn't break him, it built the foundation for a man who fought for every single thing he ever got. He wrestled his way into college, not the theatrical kind of wrestling, but the brutal collegiate version where pain tolerance decides who wins. When World War II arrived, Douglas served aboard small, vulnerable Navy submarine chasers, constantly exposed to torpedo and enemy fire, eventually earning a medical discharge from a service-related injury he never used as an excuse for anything. On set, that same relentlessness showed up in every physical scene. For Spartacus, he trained alongside real fighters, refused stunt doubles, and took legitimate hits to keep the combat sequences authentic. After a dangerous fall injured him during filming, he was back on set within 48 hours. But his greatest display of toughness came decades later, well into his 70s, when he survived a helicopter crash that killed 2 other passengers. He relearned to walk. Then a devastating stroke robbed him of his speech entirely, and he fought through years of grueling therapy to get it back, eventually writing a book about the ordeal. Director Stanley Kubrick summed it up best: when Douglas decided something was going to happen, it happened. Next, we moved to an actor whose quiet, unsettling stillness on screen came directly from real combat most audiences never knew about. Number 6. Lee Marvin, the Marine who never stopped limping. Lee Marvin's most famous quality on screen was his stillness, that quiet, dangerous calm that made audiences uneasy without him ever raising his voice. That energy wasn't invented for the camera. As a Marine fighting through some of the Pacific's most brutal island campaigns during World War II, Marvin witnessed combat most people can't imagine. During the Battle of Saipan, machine gun fire tore through his back, severing his sciatic nerve and leaving him with a permanent limp that he skillfully disguised on screen for the rest of his career. While other actors studied technique to portray killers convincingly, Marvin had already lived through the real thing. Directors noticed he moved differently than everyone else on set, precise, economical, stripped of any theatrical flourish, because he understood that real violence isn't dramatic. It's fast, ugly, and over quickly. That authenticity bled into every hitman and soldier role he ever took, giving audiences a genuine chill they couldn't quite explain. The legend followed him off camera too. During a location shoot in Oregon, Marvin reportedly held his own in a bar fight against multiple lumberjacks, then showed up on set the next morning bruised but refusing to delay filming. Co-stars admitted they found him intimidating not because he was loud, but precisely because he wasn't. Now let's talk about an actor whose fearlessness terrified insurance companies so badly they tried everything to stop him. Number 7. Steve McQueen, too fearless for his own studio. Steve McQueen's childhood offered him nothing soft to hold on to. Abandoned by both parents, and raised largely in reform schools, he ran away from home at 14 and drifted through trouble before eventually joining the Marines, where his rebellious streak got him demoted 7 times and landed him 41 days in the brig. But when it actually mattered, McQueen's character showed itself completely. During Arctic training, he pulled 5 fellow Marines from a sinking tank without a second's hesitation, risking his own life in the process. That same wild unpredictability paired with total reliability under pressure defined his entire acting career. McQueen insisted on performing nearly every stunt himself, against constant studio objections. On The Great Escape, the famous fence jump was the only stunt producers physically stopped him from doing. He nearly drowned filming river scenes for the sand pebbles, and for the towering inferno he demanded to do fire sequences so dangerous that professional stuntmen hesitated to attempt them. Off-camera, he raced motorcycles and cars competitively, sometimes under fake names just to keep studios from finding out and shutting him down. At the grueling 1970 Sebring race, he finished second overall while racing with a broken foot in a cast. When he learned his name had turned up on a notorious kill list, he didn't hire bodyguards. He just started carrying a loaded Magnum. Now for an actor whose war wound was hidden under his robes for years while he kept performing through cancer treatment. Number 8. Charlton Heston, duty above everything. Charlton Heston's larger-than-life screen presence as Moses and Ben-Hur wasn't just costume and staging. It was backed by genuine physical endurance and an almost stubborn sense of duty. Before Hollywood, Heston served as a radio operator and aerial gunner in the Army Air Forces during World War II. That military discipline never left him. Where other stars might have demanded lighter props or easier setups, Heston insisted on doing the opposite. For the 10 Commandments, he personally hoisted genuine stone tablets take after brutal take, refusing to let the crew swap in anything lighter. During the greatest story ever told, he tore shoulder ligaments performing a stunt, and instead of halting the shoot, he had it wrapped during lunch and returned to filming that same afternoon. His most sobering ordeal came after working on the same nuclear test-adjacent production that affected John Wayne. Nearly half the 220 cast and crew members eventually developed cancer, Heston among them. Even after surgery and losing a lung, he kept taking on physically demanding roles that would exhaust actors half his age. It wasn't ego driving him. It was an almost old-fashioned sense of obligation to the work itself. Now, let's go back to where this kind of toughness often starts. Hard labor, deep underground, before most kids have even started school. Number 9. Charles Bronson, forged in a coal mine. Charles Bronson's silence on screen wasn't mysterious for the sake of style. It was earned the hard way. Born into extreme poverty as one of 15 children in a Pennsylvania mining family, Bronson was working underground before most children finish elementary school, breathing coal dust hundreds of feet below the surface. That environment didn't just shape his body, it shaped how little he needed to prove to anyone afterward. When World War II broke out, he traded one dangerous environment for another entirely, serving as a tail gunner on B-29 bombing runs over Japan, where he was wounded in combat and awarded a Purple Heart. By the time Hollywood found him, Bronson wasn't chasing fame, he simply wanted steady work after years of cooking, farm labor, and part-time boxing to survive. That lack of ego showed in his performances. His punches looked efficient because they were the product of a man who understood exactly where to strike to end a confrontation quickly. A co-star on The Mechanic once described being genuinely shocked by his real strength during a scene. Bronson wasn't performing aggression, he simply had it. When rumors circulated that the mob had put out threats against him after Death Wish, studio executives offered him protection. Bronson turned it down, saying flatly that he'd lived and seen too much to be afraid of that. One more actor combines this same blue-collar grit with a stare that made directors nervous just to watch, and he might be the toughest of them all. Number 10. Robert Mitchum, the man who didn't need to act. We're closing with the actor whose entire life reads like a survival manual. Robert Mitchum was riding freight trains across Depression-era America as a teenage drifter before he was even old enough to shave properly, doing whatever brutal labor kept him fed: ditch digging, coal mining, anything available. At 16, he was sentenced to a Georgia chain gang. That scarred face and permanently broken nose people remember from his films weren't studio makeup. They were simply his face. The toughness followed him straight into fame. When Mitchum was arrested on a marijuana charge in 1948, most people assumed it would end his career instantly. Instead, he served his 60 days without complaint and walked out more popular than before, never once apologizing or explaining himself. Asked once to describe his acting technique, he famously deadpanned that he had exactly two styles, with a horse and without one. That wasn't a joke about laziness. It was the truth. He wasn't performing toughness, he simply carried it into every scene without effort. Co-stars said working with him was unsettling precisely because he never needed to raise his voice or prove anything. The calm of someone who had already survived real fights radiated off him. A director once admitted you didn't really direct Mitchum, you just kept the camera rolling and hoped nobody got hurt. And that's the thread connecting every name on this list. These weren't men playing tough. They were tough men who happened to end up in front of a camera.